Hi everybody, welcome to part 2 of my Horizon Zero Dawn review. In the first video, I took a look at Zero Dawn's gameplay and analyzed how well it lives up to the title of Open World Action RPG. Please feel free to watch the first video before this one, but it's not necessary to watch them in any particular order. I'm sure pretty much everyone who's wanted to play this game already has at this point, so I'm not super worried about spoilers, but I am going to go through the main plot points, and I don't want to recap every single little detail, so it'll probably make more sense to you if you've already played the game. And with all that out of the way, let's get started. I'd like to start from the top, but I feel the need to preface what I'm about to say with this. The first few hours are easily the cheesiest and shittiest in the whole game. It's not by a long shot, there are some other areas of the game that get pretty cringy as well, but the opening takes the cake in my opinion. The game starts with several lengthy cutscenes and a prologue sequence where the player assumes control of a child version of Aloy, the main protagonist. The cutscenes set up two recurring themes that we'll see much more of throughout the rest of this review: ham-fisted dialogue and less than stellar voice acting. To its credit, Zero Dawn wastes no time shoving players into the ruins of the Old Ones, where most of the important story missions will take place. I love the atmosphere in these ruins. The dilapidated metallic structures and stalagmites made of petrified dust wordlessly convey a sense of familiarity and foreboding. The decaying corpses of the Old Ones themselves juxtaposed with the sterile furniture and rundown equipment, which have nevertheless fared better over the years, if only because they're not made out of organic material. All of the brilliant story moments that I was talking about in the first video happen in settings just like this, which justifies the reuse of this dank atmosphere throughout the course of the game. Also, to the game's credit, we are introduced to the Focus very early on. The Focus is a really advanced Bluetooth from the early 2000s that lets Aloy communicate with the technology of the Old Ones. It's basically this game's equivalent of detective mode. I'll have a lot more to say about the Focus in a bit, but for now it's good to get the player used to scanning audio logs off of corpses. This should get the player's brain juices flowing, and you should start wondering things like who are these people and what happened to them? How did their society fall? After a while, the kid with the worst bangs in the world makes her way out of the ruins and finds Rost, who is apparently her caretaker. It's here where we can draw a very fine line between the two aspects of this game's narrative, the stuff that happens below ground and the stuff that happens above ground. Below ground is where all of the intrigue and compelling plot points happen, but the environments do get a bit samey and the gameplay is more restricted. Above ground is where all the beautiful graphics are, and where most of the enjoyable gameplay is, but the stories that unfold up there are disjointed at best, which we'll see in just a bit. Back to the opening, Rost and Aloy are outcasts from the local tribal society called the Nora. The reasons for their ostracisms are left a mystery to both the player and to Aloy. Rost has been raising her since she was a baby, but she's proven to have a disloyalty streak. Despite that, after getting her out of the metal ruins, Rost begins to teach our child Aloy how to hunt. It's here that we get some very rudimentary gameplay tutorials. Apart from the cutscenes, there are multiple walking sequences, a very forced stealth tutorial with a horrible fail-state justification, an introduction to the gathering and crafting mechanics, and the first of many dialogue wheel decision-making moments with surface-level differences and minimal consequences outside of the scenes in which they take place. Criticizing this game for starting out with childlike gameplay is obviously some pretty low-hanging fruit. To be fair, even Breath of the Wild, a game that overshadowed Zero Dawn so hard that I'm not going to be mentioning it again for the rest of this video, starts out with a restrictive linear tutorial. At the same time though, Zero Dawn didn't have to shoot itself in the foot by not showing its core gameplay until about 45 minutes in. While they're out training, one of the local Nora kids falls off a cliff and lands behind a bunch of machines. Rost says he can't do anything, and it's only a matter of time until the machines find the boy and kick him to death, which is a pretty brutal thing to say to a literal child, and he explains that he can't shoot at them because it'll cause a stampede and trample the kid. Aloy, being the rambunctious scamp that she is, disregards Rost's orders and goes to save him. One more forced stealth tutorial ensues, and then they're both out of harm's way. Conveniently after everyone's safe and sound, the kids' trainers show up and start negging the fuck out of Rost and Aloy. The main guy calls Aloy motherless, which seems to carry a lot of weight because the Nora tribe worships a deity called All-Mother. And just in case you didn't get it, in the very next scene, Aloy is getting attacked by some kids, and guess what they call her?
Stay away, no mother!
It's good that we're setting up one of the game's major conflicts. Aloy doesn't know who her mother is, and she wants to find out who she is, but we are laying it on a little bit thick here. As for the attackers, this is where the first dialogue wheel decision-making moment happens. Again, I'll have more to say about these later, but for now I'll just say that they only convey the illusion of choice, and they don't affect the narrative in any meaningful way. At least not intentionally. After her assailants are called away, Rost and Aloy have a heart-to-heart about what to do next. Aloy wants to find out why she's an outcast, and she wants to find out who her mother is. Rost either doesn't know or is unwilling to tell her the answers, so instead he tells her the matriarchs of the tribe might have the answers she wants. But the only way she'll be able to talk to them is if she wins a competition called The Proving. The Proving is a rite of passage that Nora youths take to become Braves, which are basically tribal warriors. So we have our motivation, Aloy wants to find out who her mother is, and our goal, win the Proving. This is all fine and good. What's not fine and good is what happens next. See, Rost not only has to train her to become a competent hunter, he also has to train her to be the best warrior in the tribe. Also, we need her to grow up into being an adult so that we can actually get to the game that we paid for, so what we end up with is this Rocky-style training montage that has a time skip right smack dab in the middle of it. This is a pretty big red flag for this game's story, especially since this game is an RPG. As I said in the first video, and I just don't think that there's a vast enough difference between Aloy's skills at the beginning of the game and Aloy's skills at the end of the game. The reason I said that is because the Aloy that comes out the other side of this training montage is basically the same Aloy that we get for the rest of the game. Literally all leveling up in this game is rendered absolutely pointless because the single biggest jump in power level happens right here in this cutscene. Her strength, dexterity, speed, and resilience could increase during gameplay. I mean, come on, that would make way too much sense. And it would give the leveling mechanic, you know, a reason to exist. If you ask me, which I know all of you did, a lot of this opening with child Aloy could have been stripped back, and many of those plot points, the tribesmen hating the outcasts, the kids attacking Aloy, the reveal of the Proving, could have all been moved up to when Aloy was an adult, and not much would have to change. In fact, a few things would probably have worked out better. That concludes the end of the prologue. I feel like I should mention that I've been talking for about 8 minutes now, and we still haven't gotten to the point in the story where the core gameplay happens. For me, the best part of playing this game is discovering new, lush, and diverse scenery while fighting gigantic robot dinosaurs with a bow and arrow. The fact that this game is hesitant to show these cards from the outset is frustrating to me, especially on repeat playthroughs when I just want to get into the action. Look, openings are hard, okay? Especially in a sci-fi game where you need to introduce the player to an entire world without overwhelming them too early on. That being said, I find it really hard to overlook this much hand-holding, especially since none of these mechanics are particularly new or innovative, and they're not difficult to grasp without Daddy Rost showing you the ropes like the child you are. On the story end of things, I think the prologue does its job fairly well, despite some questionable voice acting in some places, but don't worry, it's about to get much, much worse. After the training montage, we cut to Aloy looking for Rost at their home. Once she finds him, Rost says he has one last thing to teach Aloy before the Proving, and that she should meet him at the edge of the Embrace, which is sort of like the Holy Land of the Nora. Also, Rost tells Aloy to gather the components to make fire arrows before she meets him. If you want, you can ask Rost if he has any additional tasks for Aloy, and he'll ask her to get some meat for another outcast called Odd Grata. Aloy says she needs to get a tripcaster from a local merchant, and Rost makes a big stink about how the merchant is breaking the law every time he sells to an outcast, but he's fine with it in the end. After all of that, we're finally let loose in the open world to look for things to do. There's no tall neck in this area, so the map is already cleared, which means we can immediately get started with doing side quests and activating campfires, which are this game's fast travel points. Insert dated Dark Souls joke here. I don't think I was supposed to read that. I've already talked about the open world in the first video and what I believe are its shortcomings, so let's move on. The side quests you could do at this point are pretty one-dimensional. Most of them hammer home the idea that outcasts are supposed to be shunned. But I mean, they can't be too shunned because there are still plenty of people that want to talk to you and get your help. Like this injured guy on the side of the street, and this lady who wants you to find her brother.
I have nothing against outcasts, far from it.
It makes me wonder if the punishment for talking to an outcast is literally just a slap on the head like the kid from the prologue. But anyway, after you get all the required materials and help some people if you want, Rost is waiting up by the northern gate of the Embrace. When you get there, you can exhaust all of the dialogue options telling him about all the wacky hijinks you've been up to, or you could just get straight to the point. There's one dialogue option where Aloy says she won't shun Rost after the proving, and that she doesn't care about the tribal laws. Rost doesn't approve of this behavior, but he doesn't outright forbid her from going through with it. I think it's important to bring that up because it gets across the feeling that these two have been through a lot together, and I think even if Rost doesn't want her to break tribal law, he knows he can't stop her from doing what she wants anyway, and maybe he's even a bit glad to hear that she's not going to completely abandon him after the proving. This game does get a lot of flack for having some really shitty voice acting, and I think it's mostly well-deserved, but I do want to point out these moments where complex emotions are conveyed really well. These are the moments that get too easily overlooked. Moving on, after their conversation, they wait for nighttime and then head outside of the Embrace. Apparently, Rost had some friends in the Nora before he was cast out, so the guards at the gate let them through. This is just one of a few gates along the wall that separates the Embrace from the actual wilderness. Nora land extends far beyond the Embrace, but the most dangerous and volatile machines are kept away from the Embrace by the Braves. There's a carcass of a sawtooth near the outside of the gate, and Rost explains that it's a new machine that's only been around for the past 10 years. It's much more aggressive than the machines that came before it, and apparently, judging by all the carnage right outside the gate, the Braves have been having a hard time keeping these machines under control. The mission is to hunt one of these things. Aloy is able to beat it single-handedly, but the point of the mission wasn't to test Aloy's skills, it was so that Rost could lecture Aloy about protecting Nora land. She doesn't seem too convinced, and they head back to the Embrace. If you thought that was a long walk for not a lot of payoff, you're correct. Now it's the day before the proving, and Aloy and Rost have decided to meet up outside of Mother's Heart, which is like the capital city of the Nora. There's even a line about Aloy being surprised by how noisy it is, drawing attention to the fact that she's never been around a large group of people before. Remember this line, it's very important. Rost tells her to meet with one of the matriarchs once she's inside, and then tells her that once she becomes part of the tribe, he's gonna go where she can never find him because he doesn't want her to break tribal law. This completely pisses all over the scene that I was praising earlier. It could have been fine if it led to a genuine interaction between these two characters, but instead it leads to another wheelie dialogue decision moment where all three paths lead to the same outcome after maybe 2 or 3 dialogue lines. The matriarch Rost talked about lets Aloy into the city and says that she can't stay with her because she's too busy looking after a foreign envoy from another tribe called the Karja, to which Aloy responds,
Karja.
Psycho Mantis.
Then you're let loose to roam the festival and take in the sights. You could talk to the NPCs that are all milling about like they're at one of those underground rock shows I used to go to in college, but they all only have like 1 line of dialogue. Further into the city, Aloy reunites with that kid that she saved in the prologue. It looks like he hasn't aged a day, even though Aloy looks 20 years older. He made some armor for her because he's a massive simp, and he will continue to be ignored by her for the rest of the game because Horizon Zero Dawn is a feminist game, which means there are no romance options. /S. We'll talk more about feminism in this game in a bit, don't you worry. Exploring the festival more, we see a bunch of different things happening all at once. People are gathered and listening to some singers, there's a drunk guy on a roof arguing with his lady friend, and one of the matriarchs is telling some children tales and legends about All-Mother and how the metal world of the old ones came to ruin. You can stop and admire these things for however long you want, but the plot moves forward up by the Matriarch's lodge. There we see the envoy from the Karja for the first time. The first of the two men on stage is in a priest getup and starts reading a scroll in the most ridiculously pompous accent, because this is shorthand for the Karja being civilized. Apparently, the Nora hate the Karja because in a war that ended 2 years ago, the Karja started enslaving people, so the crowd starts slinging fruit at the priest. Then this other guy comes up and he has the best facial hair I've ever seen in a video game. He explains that, hey, he's not Karja, he's an Oseram, and the Karja were killing his people too, until this new king came around, and now everything's fine. Everyone seems to be okay with this, so the mob disbands. Meanwhile, Aloy spots a guy in the crowd with a focus and she goes up to talk to him. This guy's Olin, and he leaves in a hurry after a malfunction. Then you get to talk to Aaron, the guy from a few seconds ago. You remember him? Do you? Are you even paying attention at this point? Aaron makes some weird remarks to Aloy, which I guess is flirting or something, but obviously it just falls flatter than the fucking earth. Then you can waste a shit ton of time asking him everything under the sun about recent history and lore, but eventually you'll have to go to the blessing of the proving or some shit. This part's boring. Skip.
Thank you, Savage!
Oh, not that far. So, after the blessing, you get to talk to the matriarch that you met at the gate, Aaron again, Olin again, and the sun priest of the Karja. All of them will have various amounts of dialogue for you to explore and get caught up on all the lore and whatnot. After that, Aloy gets bullied by some dickheads, one of whom was the kid that threw that rock at her all those years ago, and now they're gonna run in the same proving, which is tomorrow, so everyone goes to sleep. The next day, Aloy wakes up and wins the proving. Obviously. I mean, there was a training montage for Christ's sake. There's a fake out about whether or not the judge lady would actually let her win even though she's an outcast, but it turns out the whole thing was a fake out because the proving gets attacked by a bunch of dudes in scary wooden masks with skulls on them. After fending them all off, Aloy looks at one of the bodies and sees that it has a focus on it. While she's stashing it in the world's worst inventory, the worst inventory in any video game, this huge fucking lumbering brick of a man somehow sneaks up behind her and grabs her easily. This is the second most important villain in the game. He's so important, in fact, that if you've played this game before, you've already completely forgotten his name. Before he can kill Aloy, Rost comes in to save the day. Spoiler alert, fucking Beefcake kills Rost. Then instead of turning to Aloy to finish the job, he leaves and orders his men to blow up the cliffside. But before the thing can blow, not quite dead yet, Rost pushes Aloy off the cliff and then dies, prompting a dream sequence that probably could have used some reworking. We'll call that the end of Chapter 1. For the record, there aren't actually chapters in this game, I just think it makes sense to break up the narrative like this. So far, we've gotten a lot of setup. We still have the main conflict of Aloy finding out who her mother is, but now we have these other two clans, the Karja and the Oseram, and the new, more dangerous machines that have been popping up in the last 10 years. There are also the tensions between the Nora and Karja because of a recent war. There's going to be a little bit more setup at the beginning of Chapter 2, but then things really start to get rolling after that. Aloy wakes up in the heart of the Sacred Mountain, which is normally off limits to all Nora except for the matriarchs. She doesn't have her focus or weapons, so she has to search around for them, and once she finds them, she scans the focus that she got from that dead cultist guy. On it, she finds some footage of her conversation with Olin, which leads her to believe that Olin is working with the cultists. After that, some footage plays of an older woman who looks suspiciously like her, and their DNA is matched 99.47%. Aloy thinks that this is her mom, but before she can think too much about it, she hears someone coming in behind her, so she draws her bow. This makes it seriously hard for me to believe that fucking Beefcake Man could just sneak up behind her so easily earlier, but whatever. The person she's pointing her bow at is the friendly matriarch from the beginning of the festival, and she wants to take Aloy to her mother, which is a giant door. Apparently, one day the matriarchs just found baby Aloy outside of this door, and they didn't know what to do, so they settled on exiling her with Rost. That's one mystery solved. The door scans her, and again we get a 99.47% DNA match with the older lady, but there's some sort of corruption in the alpha registry, so she can't get in. This is now the new goal: fix the corruption so that Aloy can get inside the door and figure out how she was born. Also, there was a war party of Braves that went after the killers who attacked the Proving, but they got ambushed and now nobody knows where they are. There's this one strange line about how the power of the killers is overwhelming, and that Aloy should find a different lead to follow to see if she can find out who the older lady from the Focus is. That one line leads her to focus, no pun intended, on Olin, because the killers saw her through his focus, and now she wants revenge. There are a couple of problems that I have with this line of reasoning. One is that the power of the killers is not overwhelming at all. We're literally about to see that in this very chapter. And two, there's no reason that Aloy should be bloodthirsty for revenge on Olin because she doesn't even have any solid evidence that he's actually working for the cultists. He could have just had a focus on, and the killers were somehow able to hack into it and see what he was seeing. I know that she doesn't know what hacking is, but at the very most she should just want answers from him. I seriously have no idea why she blames the entire attack on him. Anyway, to go after Olin, she'd have to leave this sacred land of the Nora, which would usually make her an exile, but the friendly matriarch wants to get around this by making Aloy a seeker, which is an extra special kind of bullshit that nobody cares about so that she can go follow her destiny or whatever. One of the matriarchs doesn't want this to happen because she's the bad one, but the other one says it's fine, so it's fine. Right as they're wrapping up, Mother's Heart gets attacked by a corruptor, which is a unique type of machine that can get other machines to fight for it. You can tell it's an evil machine because it's all black. That's kind of fucking racist. After beating it, Aloy gets the ability to override machines, which means that you can mount certain machines and you can get certain machines to fight for you. After this point, there are two objectives: get to Meridian to confront Olin and find out what happened to the Nora war party that went missing. Leaving the Embrace, mostly for good this time, Aloy runs into a Brave named Varl, who politely asks that Aloy help find the war party and his mother who is leading it before she goes to Meridian. You can do either quest first, but I've always done the war party quest first because the game heavily suggests that that's what you're supposed to do. Even so, that doesn't stop the war party quest line from feeling like a beefed up side quest. Before we continue with the main story, I should mention that the game opens up considerably after you leave the Embrace. In fact, except for a few select areas, I'm pretty sure the entire map is accessible to you now. As such, you'll encounter your first bandit camp, Tall Neck, hunting grounds, and cauldron in this section. There's an extra problem with the open world that I didn't mention in the first video that will get much worse as soon as we venture outside of Nora Lands, but for now, all I'll say is that the novelty of all these challenge areas is enough to keep things engaging as you explore the nearby metal ruins. Don't be fooled though, we're above ground, so we're not learning anything more about the old ones as we search around here. Our focus is still on the tribal societies and their conflicts, and right now our primary objective is to find that war party, and the first place to look is the spot where they supposedly got ambushed. The killers apparently surprised the war party with a couple of corruptors and their overridden machines. When Aloy gets to the site, she tries to figure out what happened by using her focus and scanning the ground for information. Like I said when we got the focus, it really is this game's version of detective mode, and depending on how many side quests you've done, this could be the first time you see Aloy using the focus like this. After getting some insight as to what happened at the ambush, a survivor comes by and tells you that a few others survived and they were still on the chase. Aloy tells him to go to the gate to tell Varl what happened and that she'll go after the other survivors. This leads us to a campsite where we scan a bunch of things that eventually reveal a trail for Aloy to follow. This is the extent of the detective mode in this game. That's it. I mean, you can scan machines mid-fight to find out their weaknesses, but aside from that, this is the most complex the gameplay with the focus gets. Unfortunately, it's incredibly shallow and honestly pretty forgettable. I think in principle the concept of putting together a scene from the past using only certain information has some legs, but obviously I prefer a whole game dedicated to that concept rather than the paper-thin version of the idea that we get in this game. Okay, so after we follow the trail we meet Varl's mom and war chief Sona, who takes the trophy for the worst voice acted character in the entire game.
You're lucky I happened by.
I mean, seriously, this is like some Bethesda tier bullshit.
You blaspheme.
I'm gonna skip over some parts of this quest line, but the gist is that Aloy tracks the people who attacked the Proving to the remnants of an old sports stadium, and then after thinning their numbers outside the so-called metal ring, she sneaks in, blasts a hole in the wall, and the war party kills all of the cultists. Pretty easily, in fact. I have no idea why the matriarch thought this group's power was overwhelming. This assault is seen as a wholly good thing. The Nora are getting vengeance for the attack on the Proving, blood spilled for blood spilled. Regardless of how much this questline puts straight up revenge killing in a positive light, it wraps up the attack on the Proving in a nice, neat bow. I mean, sure, we didn't get fucking Beefcake Man, whose name you still can't remember, but we got all of his boys, and it seems like they really are dealt with. There's no tie-in between these so-called cultists and Meridian, so in terms of a narrative, this is a dead end. This right here is why this entire questline feels like a glorified side quest, because this battle is never mentioned again for the rest of the game. It would have been kinda cool if the killers had some sort of loose connection to the Karja, like they were kind of Karja, but they weren't aligned with the new Sun King. Then once the Nora found out, they'd just blame all the outsiders, and then the tensions between the two tribes that were set up in Chapter 1 would be reignited. Maybe they could be called like the Evil Karja or Dark Karja or something like that, but they're not, so let's move on.
The killers, this corruption, they're all parts of the mystery I'm chasing. Where the trail leads, I go.
And the trail leads to Olin in Meridian. I mean, you did just kill all of the people who attacked the Proving, and I don't think interrogating their corpses will give you any information as to why they attacked and why they were looking for you. So Olin really is your only choice at this point. Before you can leave Nora territory, you have to deal with a Karja outpost that isn't letting travelers through on account of the corruption that's been driving local machines crazy. You find out about this post by talking to a lady from a nearby town, and she says that if you deal with all the corrupted machines, the Karja might let you pass. To do that, you have to clear at least 3 corrupted zones, which are just machine sites where the machines in question are corrupted. When I was talking about the open world in the first video, I didn't mention the corrupted zones in the challenge areas section, but I probably should have. They aren't that different from regular machine areas though, so in my opinion they're not exactly the most unique thing in this game's world. But whatever. After you clear 3 corrupted zones, you have to go up to the Karja outpost and deal with the corruptor that's attacking their wall. After you beat it, Aloy starts talking to the guards like she's been here before, even if it's the very first time you've ever visited the outpost. Then the guards let you pass into Karja territory. Alright, now that we're out in Karja territory, it's time to mention that other problem that I had with the open world. I didn't mention it in the first video because it has more to do with how the open world is used as a vessel for the story of the game. There's a fucking lot of distance between the Karja outpost and Meridian, and I think it's safe to assume that not many people just outright sprint straight from the outpost to the city. The game itself seems to suggest that that's the wrong option because there is a substantial amount of content between the two places. There are 2 tall necks, plenty of side quests, and more than a few bandit camps and cauldrons to discover. There's also just the straight up mystique of the open world, that wonderful feeling you get when you see the first Thunderjaw off in the distance and you think to yourself, wow, this world is alive. The real problem crops up when you finally get to Meridian and you think to yourself, why the fuck am I here? Part of this problem is that the motivation to go after Olin is not as strong as the game pretends it is. It's not like Olin is fucking Beefcake Man. At most, he tipped the cultists off to your location, but it's not like he personally gave the order to kill you and the entire Nora tribe. Also, there's so much shit to do in between these big story moments that the player can, and most likely will, get lost in it all and forget what it was they were supposed to be paying attention to. It's not just this gap between the outpost and Meridian that suffers from this problem either. If that were the case, I don't think I'd even bring it up. It's that this is a problem after every single main story quest from here until the very end of the game. I think that the best way to phrase it is that from here on out, the open world and the story will be in conflict with each other, and both sides of the equation are worse off because of it. I mean, I suppose, to be fair, every now and then you might come across a side quest that has the vaguest hint of an impact on the main story, but those are very few and far between. Anyway, to stop that problem from happening in this video, let's get back on track. After spending a good few hours in the open world, we're ready to see the big city, Meridian, the largest settlement in this game and the capital of the Karja tribe. The city's size and location on top of a mesa make it easy to spot well in advance of actually getting there. Now there's a couple details that I want to mention. The first is that once she gets there, Aloy should be freaking out about the size of this city. Do you remember back in chapter 1 when she was making a big deal out of going into Mother's Heart because she'd never been around that many people before? I'd say Meridian is probably 2 to 3 times as large, and aside from 1 or 2 throwaway lines of dialogue, Aloy seems to fit right in. Also, it's very likely that in your travels you've picked up a mount or two. If you try approaching Meridian or any human settlement in this game while riding a machine, a little prompt will show up and completely cuck you out of riding into town on your badass machine. I have no idea why it's like this. It's probably so that they didn't have to have every single NPC lose their mind when they see a wild machine get ridden for the first time. The first thing Aloy has to do when she gets there is talk to the guards at the gate. They don't want to let her in because the city's on lockdown after the ambush and murdering of the captain of the Vanguard, who also happens to be Erin's sister, Ursa. Apparently, the culprit behind the attack was the Shadow Karja army. Shadow Karja. Maybe they could be called like the Evil Karja or Dark Karja or something like that. Now there's a good chance that I'm an idiot and I missed something in between the outpost and Meridian that actually explains what the Shadow Karja are. But as of right now, this scene at the gates of Meridian is the first instance I can find of their existence being brought up at all. Anyway, Erin conveniently shows up to shoo away the guards, and I guess there must be a tavern close to the city's entrance because he is completely fucked. Despite that, the two seem to have a relatively normal conversation, then Aloy insists that she needs to go to Olin's house to search around and see if she can find out where he currently is. Once they get there, Aloy does some snooping around with her focus and discovers that Olin went to a dig site that he frequents regularly. She also sees a hologram of his wife and daughter being held hostage by the cultists. I guess you didn't kill all of them in the metal ring after all. Now that she knows where to go, Aloy's eager to get on her way, but Erin, after seeing what she can do with her focus, asks her to help him find out who killed his sister. So here we have another fork in the road. You can either help Erin with his murder mystery first, or you can go after Olin first. Either way works, and they both lead to the same outcome. Let's talk about finding Olin first. When you get to the dig site, you see Olin there with a bunch of cultists unearthing and rebirthing some corruptors. Olin seems horrified by this, almost as if he didn't know the cult was doing this the whole time. Then everyone flinches and a strange man's voice comes through Aloy's focus. There's a detail about this scene that I really love. Since the entire map is opened up to you as soon as you pass the outpost, you can actually visit the capital city of the Shadow Karja well before you even know what a Shadow Karja is. If you do, this mystery man will cut in and tell you not to go into the city because if they discover Aloy, they'll have her killed. If this happens, then when you go to find Olin, a different dialogue line will play out when he interrupts because this is not the first time that Aloy's heard his voice. Someone on the writing team at Guerrilla thought enough ahead to make these subtle changes, and I really want to point them out because they show a deeper level of understanding about how storytelling can be adapted specifically for the medium of video games. Unfortunately, small touches like these are the exception and not the rule. Still though, I think it's impressive and worthy of praise. Anyway, this guy comes on Aloy's focus and tells her he's disabled all of the killer's focuses so she can sneak in and kill them all easier. So she does just that, and then finally goes to confront Olin. During this conversation, there are several lines of questioning that you can pursue down the dialogue wheel, or you could just ask him who the older lady is and get straight to the point. If you choose to interrogate him, he gives Aloy some pretty important information, starting with the identity of the cultists. They're called the Eclipse, and they're a radical branch of the Shadow Karja army. Who would have guessed? Also, Aloy's heard of the Shadow Karja before this point, so her incredulous
Shadow Karja.
Psycho Mantis.
makes even less sense now than it would have otherwise. Olin then goes on to explain that the Shadow Karja were aligned with the previous Sun King, and they didn't like that they lost the war, so they left Meridian and have been biding their time in a city called Sunfall ever since. Yeah, it's real the South will rise again vibes. He also tells Aloy the name of fucking Beefcake Man. Are you ready? Have you looked it up yet? His name is Helis, and he's the leader of the Eclipse. Remember when we first saw him and I said that he's the second most important villain in the game? Well, Olin mentions the number one villain, the head honcho pulling all the strings, the so-called Metal Devil, Hades. According to Olin, Hades is some sort of ancient god that's bringing the corruptors and other more dangerous machines back to life. Finally, when Aloy asks about the older woman who looks like her, Olin admits that he's seen her before in a hologram in the ruins at Maker's End, and he suggests that she go there to search for more information. After all of that, Aloy has the choice of either killing Olin or letting him live. I used to go into RPGs thinking, what would I do in this situation? When what I really should have been doing is asking, what would my character do in this situation? This is role-playing, and I think it helps justify some morally questionable decisions if you think it would be believable for your character to possibly do them. Unfortunately, the answer here is pretty obvious. I think Aloy would be hard-pressed to justify killing Olin, especially after she's already gotten her blood revenge on the real killers in the Metal Ring. Her motivation to go after Olin has been highly questionable from the start, and the revelation that his family is being held captive just makes the decision that much easier. Funnily enough, even if you kill him, you can still go rescue his family from the cultists. In fact, this decision, for how important it may feel in the moment, has extremely few tangible consequences. If you let him live, Olin never goes with you on another mission, even though his experience in delving and with the Eclipse would surely come in handy. That's because accounting for an impactful decision like this was likely too difficult for Guerrilla to handle on what I would like to remind the audience is their first open world RPG. For more on this exact issue, check out Joseph Anderson's video on The Witcher 2. Regardless of whether or not you decide to kill him, Olin tells Aloy she should go to Maker's End to search for signs of the older lady from the Focus, and with that we have our next mission. But before we get to that, I want to take a quick aside and talk about side quests and how they work in this game. Zero Dawn divides side quests into two basic groups: errands, which are typically short and only have one objective, and real side quests, which tend to be more involved. Some side quests even lead into each other, and there are a few side quest lines which tell one-off stories over the course of multiple side quests. These side stories vary in quality, but the most important thing about them, in my opinion, is that they're almost too similar to the main story, in both presentation and quality. We've already seen an example of this in the War Party questline from Chapter 2, and we're about to see it again in the questline to help Erend with his murder mystery. Both of these are main story questlines that would be a bit lacking on their own and in the context of the rest of the main story, but add on the fact that there are side quest lines that are actually fleshed out, and you can see how that would make this problem even worse. I bring this up now because there's a side quest line in Meridian for the Hunter's Lodge. This is the organization that runs the hunting grounds that are scattered around the map, and if you've seen the first video, you know how much I love the hunting grounds. There's a certain moment in one of the quests for the Hunter's Lodge that I really want to talk about because it perfectly exemplifies an issue that I have with this game's approach to storytelling, specifically when it comes to player decisions and how they affect, or rather don't affect, the narrative. In the quest in question, Aloy is trying to get a sponsor so she can become a member of the lodge. A potential sponsor has given her the task of finding out why a nearby village keeps getting attacked by glinthawks. After investigating, Aloy finds out that the Glinthawks are attracted to some snapmaw corpses that are lying around up the nearby river. It turns out these snapmaw corpses are being left behind by a group of people who have been farming them for their hearts, which they hope to sell. They took out a loan to get some seeds for their farm, and then the harvest went bad, so they're left with nothing and are at risk of losing their home. After talking with them, Aloy is given the option of either going out and getting the snapmaw hearts for them, or just straight up killing everyone right then and there. These seem like two pretty extreme ends of a spectrum, especially the second option. So far as we know, all these people did was accept a shitty loan. I mean, sure, they don't seem too concerned that the nearby village is getting attacked by Glinthawks, but their primary concern right now is just straight up survival. Also, again, we have to think about things from Aloy's perspective. What reason would she have to kill these people? The whole reason she's here is to impress her potential sponsor. What would be more befitting of a member of the Machine Hunting Lodge? Hunting machines and gathering their expensive parts, or killing a bunch of mostly innocent civilians? Well, it turns out they're both equally fine in the eyes of the sponsor. I kid you not, the only difference between doing the objectively, morally correct thing and murdering about a dozen human beings is one singular dialogue line.
Congratulations are in order. I wanted to make sure you could handle yourself.
You were watching the whole time?
Of course. Fools. Bit off more than they could chew. What a waste. But now I know you can handle yourself.
You were watching the whole time?
Of course.
Unfortunately, this is extremely standard in terms of how this game approaches decision making. In fact, it's actually a bit more involved than most dialogue wheel decisions because it actually has gameplay ramifications. That being said, I can't ignore how shallow it is. These decisions are only really here to provide the player with an illusion of choice. At most, the decisions will make the experience split for maybe 5 minutes, then both choices are railroaded back into the same timeline. I said it in the first video, and I'll say it again. Zero Dawn ripped off the Mass Effect dialogue wheels, but they didn't rip off the Paragon Renegades system that made the dialogue wheels work. Without that system in place, Aloy can just do and say horrible things with absolutely zero consequences. People will just go, well, I guess she just said that, and then fucking move on. Sorry, I know this was a bit of a tangent, but I needed to show an example of what most decision-making moments are like in this game, so that hopefully you'll understand why I'm skipping over and will continue to skip over many of the decisions in this game. Anyway, let's get back to the main narrative. We still have to help Erend avenge his dead sister. Once they meet up, Erend leads Aloy to the spot where they found Ursa's body. When they get there, they get attacked, not by the Shadow Carja which they were expecting, but by a group of Oseram, Erend's own clansmen. Despite this revelation, Erend doesn't seem too shaken up by it. He just admits to being wrong about everything and moves on. Aloy then does some detective work with her focus and theorizes that Ursa might still be alive, given the fact that when they found it, her body was reportedly too mutilated to fully identify, and the straps of some other armor set are lying close by where they found the body. Erend buys into this crackpot theory and goes to see if the body they recovered really is Ursa's. On returning to Meridian, Aloy gets greeted by a secretary of the Sun King. He informs her that Erend is in a meeting with the Sun King and that her presence has been requested. So here Aloy is, an outcast from halfway across the world, meeting with the most powerful person in the largest civilization she's ever seen, and she couldn't be more chill about it. In fact, the whole encounter reads like just another day in the life of Aloy helping those in need, rather than a monumentous occasion for any of the parties involved. I remember being taken aback by this even when I played it for the first time. Sun King Abad really is just like everyone else, and I'm not sure if that was done on purpose. At the very least, his presence and conversation is underwhelming. Anyway, during the meeting, Erend confirms Aloy's theory from the battlefield, which means that Ursa really is still alive, and the Sun King wants Aloy to help catch the person responsible for capturing her, who the secretary guy suspects is an Oseram warlord named Dervahl. That's right, there's a tertiary villain in this game, and there's an entire subplot devoted to bringing him down. a subplot that I will now summarize as briefly as I possibly can. Erend and Aloy find Ursa hidden in the basement dungeon of one of Dervahl's hideouts. As soon as they get there, Ursa dies, extremely unceremoniously, but not before telling them that Dervahl is planning to darken the sun in Meridian, whatever the fuck that means. Aloy finds a manifest of Blaze heading towards Meridian with a name on it, so they both head back and ask the secretary man if he's heard of the name before. By the way, I'm 99% sure that Blaze is gasoline. Anyway, the secretary man tells them to go to a house that was recently purchased under the name from the manifest. Also, secretary man wants Erend to take Dervahl alive so that he can sell him as a prisoner to the highest bidder. And there's a really good moment where Erend is disgusted by the idea of taking him alive.
Take him alive? So you can haggle over him? You can't be serious.
Again, this game does for sure deserve criticism for bad voice acting, but there are some good moments every now and then, I promise. Erend and Aloy go to the warehouse, and it is filled with Blaze, but it's just a distraction so that Dervahl can get into the palace undetected. Once inside, he sets up a signal that attracts machines, but in the end, Aloy and Erend stop him with the power of friendship and bows and arrows. This entire questline should have been a side quest. After all is said and done, you have to talk to the Sun King and Erend, and you have the option of talking to Dervahl in his jail cell. When you talk with Avad, he reveals that this whole goddamn predicament was solely caused by a love triangle between Dervahl, Ursa, and Avad, which kind of shits on the previously established motive of Dervahl is just a bloodthirsty bastard who wants revenge for the Karja sacrificing his wife and daughter. Then Avad tries to, flirt with Aloy, and you're given the option to respond with 3 different dialogue wheelie responses. Earlier in this video, I quipped that Zero Dawn is a feminist game, so there can't be any romance options. I obviously don't actually feel that way. There's probably no romance options in this game because it's already long as fuck, and adding a bunch of different romance subplots would be a lot of work. However, even though I was memeing earlier, I do think it is worth taking a second to analyze this game through the feminist lens, especially because of all the apparent hubbub surrounding this game and its female protagonist when it released. Let me start off by saying that representation is always a good thing. Period. Full stop. Every person deserves to have their identity represented by characters in media in an authentic capacity, meaning written and acted by people who share that identity. Everyone deserves to be able to identify with the main protagonist of a story. In fact, the more people that can identify with them, the more likely a story is to have legs and get to the heart of the human experience. So, as I am not a woman, I obviously cannot comment on how Aloy is written as a woman and how well she represents womanhood. But I am a human being, and as such I feel qualified to talk about how she's written as a human being, and this reaction to Avad flirting with her is a good place to dig into this concept. His proposition is that Aloy should stay in the city for a while because she's strong, dependable, and he could, quote, use someone like her at his side. 2 of the 3 possible responses to this proposition are extremely emotionally mature responses, and the third is the patented classic rejection, I need to go my own way. You know, it's not you, it's me. In all 3 of these responses, Aloy recognizes that Avad is trying to fill the hole in his life that was left by Ursa when she died like 2 seconds ago, and she's calling him out on it. A little more aggressively in the first option, but still. Now, even though I think this is objectively the correct response to have in this situation, we always have to come back to thinking about things from Aloy's perspective. Aloy was raised as an outcast with a religious and rule-abiding father figure. I highly doubt she got the opportunity to properly socialize as a child and young adult. As such, I'm not entirely sure she should have the social and emotional chops to navigate this situation as well as she does. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad that she does, but still. This problem isn't specific to this one scene, but it's the best place that I could find to demonstrate this problem. There are other scenes, for example this one from a side quest not too far from the Karja outpost, where Aloy does seem to be the fish out of water, adjusting to living amongst other people. Her maturity level and social skills seem to be on a sliding scale, which isn't exactly how real life works. I guess what I'm saying here is that Aloy doesn't go through any growth or change, or even reaffirmation of previously established traits throughout the course of this game. Her character just kind of molds to form into whatever scenario happens to be on hand. In this respect, she's only a couple steps removed from a blank slate protagonist, which is a shame considering how iconic she's become as a flagship character for PlayStation. Regardless, now that Dervahl is dealt with, we can finally put this chapter behind us and move on to what I believe is the best part of this game's story. Do you remember that guy who spoke through Aloy's focus when we went to confront Olin? Well, get used to hearing his voice, because he's going to be periodically checking in on Aloy every now and then. For instance, on the way to Maker's End, he comes on the focus again to tell Aloy that the woman she's looking for is called Dr. Elizabeth Sobek. He also says that he's left some supplies for Aloy near the ruins because he, quote, wants her to succeed. After either acquiring them or leaving them to the side, Aloy needs to infiltrate Maker's End, which means she needs to get past the Eclipse soldiers guarding the place. After doing that, she sees a group of cultists unearthing a giant machine that looks like a corruptor except bigger. It's called a Deathbringer, and surprise surprise, you have to fight it now. Thankfully, the cultists haven't dug its legs out of the ground yet, so it can't move. Once the Deathbringer is dealt with, Aloy starts exploring the ruins. The first thing she comes across is a door, just like the one in the Sacred Mountain, and instead of turning her away like that one did, this one opens up and greets her as Dr. Sobek. As Aloy enters the building, the computer tells her that she is 355,510 days late for a meeting with someone named Ted Faro. So I did the math on that because I'm just that cool of a guy, and it comes out to 974 years. That's 974 years, give or take a few, between the fall of the Old Ones and the events of this game. This is a ridiculously large number, and I don't know if whoever wrote that line really thought about the implications of that, or if they just wanted to have a really big number in there so the player would go, ooh, that's a long time. In terms of world building, this raises some issues. Right now, we don't know how long these current tribal societies have been around. But even if they've only been around for about half of that time, the people shouldn't be speaking English. Or at the very least, they should have a hard time deciphering the speech and text of the Old Ones. Not to mention that focuses seem to be a recent discovery, so they've been growing and evolving without the Old Ones as a reference for quite a while now. I know this is a bit nerdy and revolves around headcanon, but it seriously puzzles me considering the attention to detail that was given to other scenes that we haven't gotten to yet. After Aloy enters the building, she gets tasked with getting to Mr. Faro's office on the 35th floor. Since this place is a ruin, that means she has to climb up broken staircases and elevator shafts. Along the way, we get some legitimate backstory as to who the Old Ones were and what was going on around the time of their demise. If you haven't guessed already, we're on Earth, and these are the ruins of our human civilization. The building we're in right now used to be the headquarters of FAS, a corporate arms manufacturer and defense contractor that specifically focused on robotics. Also, they apparently created the focuses. Ted Faro was the CEO, and the data files we have place this society in the near future, from the 2030s to the 2050s. There are a lot of juicy bits of flavor text here to scan, but I'll try to keep things to only the most essential details. FAS was creating a line of peacekeeping robots that were supposedly designed to halt bloodshed in conflict zones around the globe, only of course they were doing the exact opposite. These peacekeeping robots are the corruptors and deathbringers we've been seeing the cultists dig up over the course of the game. Apparently these robots have the ability to self-sustain, link to each other, and multiply. They're run by code that continuously alters itself, so there's no way of hacking into them or gaining control over them if they happen to go rogue, which is exactly what happened. There was a group of machines that stopped taking commands from FAS and started rapidly multiplying and killing everything in sight. These machines also have the ability to convert biomass into fuel, which increases their capability to reproduce and rearm themselves. When we get to the top of the tower, we see a couple of holograms of a meeting between Elizabeth Sobeck and Ted Faro. As we see in her bio, Elizabeth was a scientist that devoted her life to reversing humanity's negative impact on the climate. She briefly worked at FAS before leaving on bad terms and becoming the CEO of her own company. All this is to say that she really doesn't like Ted Faro, and their meeting has some natural tension because of it, and that's before Ted tells her about his rampaging robots. After looking into the situation, Elizabeth calls it an apocalyptic catastrophe, saying that the rogue swarm will not only end civilization, it will consume all life on the planet within 15 months. Ted asks her to find a solution to this problem, and she comes up with a project called Zero Dawn. Yes, we are several dozen hours into this game, and almost an hour into this video, and we are just now learning about what the name of this game means. Ted has some objections to Zero Dawn, but Elizabeth twists his arm by telling him that she's going to meet with US Robot Command and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. If he doesn't back the project, well, just listen.
Or don't sign, and I will make sure they and everyone else on this planet knows the real cause of the glitch.
They call me the glitch. Do you know why they call me the motherfucking glitch?
This setup and conflict, at least to me, is far and away the most interesting thing about this game. It could just be that I'm not that familiar with the modern genre of sci-fi, because I suppose some aspects about this story could be considered cliché, but still. The corporation dealing in death, the mystery of how life survived after the apocalypse, I don't know, it's just all very cool to me. It's cool enough that I'm eager to find out what happens next. And on that subject, the man from the Focus appears in front of Aloy as a hologram to discuss what they've both just seen. This guy's name is Silence, and he's dedicated his life to discovering what happened to the old ones. He also has extensive knowledge over both ancient civilization and ancient technology like the Focuses. The last thing that Elizabeth said was that she was going to US Robot Command, and Silence knows where that is. It's a ruin now, obviously, and it's called the Grave Horde by the Oseram that live nearby. That's our next target. Upon arriving, we have to clear out the cultists and corrupted machines that are in the area, and then we have the option to scan around for a bit and discover a bunch of audio files left on the corpses of the old ones. There's a hologram that says Enduring Victory, but all these dead bodies are from soldiers who fought and died to defend this base. Actually, they seem pretty content to do so, and it's shit like this that really elevates these sections of the game.
If this is really it, I gotta say, it's been an honor to serve beside these tanks.
Here it comes. Grease for contact!
Aloy is down in the ruins discovering how the old ones lived and died. The writers really cared a lot about making these audio logs a window into the lives of the people who made them. They're filled with such character that it's not hard to imagine their lives outside of the small glimpse that we have. That's much more that could be said for basically everyone that you meet above ground. There are many, many more audio logs like this both in this specific ruin and in all the rest of the ruins, but I'll restrain myself from talking about them more than necessary for the sake of time, also so that I don't spoil too much. They really are worth discovering for yourself if you haven't listened to them already. As we're exploring the ruins, we come across a cute little turn the wheel puzzle, followed by a couple of encounters with the Eclipse, who are searching the ruins for machines. Further inside, there's the corpse of a large machine, presumably the one that all these soldiers died fighting. If you watched some of the holograms back at the FAS headquarters, you'll recognize this machine as a BOR-7 Horus. This thing was basically a walking machine factory, and was responsible for manufacturing more corruptors and deathbringers. Unfortunately, we won't get the opportunity to fight one in this game, but I really hope in the sequel we'll be able to see one of these bad boys in action. Speaking of seeing some bad boys in action, the Eclipse are here, and they've created a Deathbringer out of the corpse of the Horus, and this one can move. This fight was particularly challenging for me for no reason, but as I continued to fight it, I found myself wondering, how are these machines responsible for the end of all life on Earth when they can be beaten by a singular human being with a bow and arrow? I think this is just one of those things that we have to put in the same category as how come bullets, arrows, and explosions don't just kill Aloy on the spot. It's a necessary suspension of disbelief in order to enjoy the game properly. After all the good times are up, Aloy wanders into the central command room of the base. Inside, there's a hologram of a meeting between Dr. Sobek and the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States military, headed by General Harris. Just like in Ted Farrow's office, the hologram doesn't include the part where Elizabeth explains Project Zero Dawn. It only records the reaction of the generals. General Harris proposes Operation Enduring Victory, which is basically a militarization of the civilian population intended to fight off the swarms of machines long enough that Project Zero Dawn could be completed. In this scene, the writers really give away the fact that they're not from America for two very specific reasons. One is that the Joint Chiefs of Staff are listening to a civilian scientist in the first place, let alone taking her advice and putting all of their resources behind her. And the other is that one of the generals in the meeting calls Operation Enduring Victory a war crime, which is really hilarious when you realize that these are supposed to be the commanders of the fucking United States military. General Harris tells Dr. Sobek that he's prepared some space for Project Zero Dawn at a decommissioned orbital launch base in Utah. Silence looks this up and discovered that somehow, the coincidence of all coincidences, this orbital launch base is directly underneath Sunfall, the capital of the Shadow Carja, and more specifically, it's underneath the Sun Ring where the previous Sun King slaughtered thousands of Osram and Nora for blood sacrifice. Great. Silence tells Aloy if she just waltzes into Sunfall and any of the Eclipse officers who also happen to be high-ranking officials of the Shadow Carja army see her, she'll be dead within minutes. He then proposes that they crash the Eclipse's focus network so that they can get into the city without worrying about enemy focuses. Silence then sends Aloy to the location of the so-called weak spot, and the two of them have their next objective. This next mission is the one that I mentioned in the first video, where its structure resembles that of a typical modern action game, along the lines of Uncharted. Before we get to all that delicious gameplay though, there's a cutscene where Silence reveals that Aloy is about to infiltrate the main base of the Eclipse. He also tells her he used to assist the Eclipse before he realized they were unearthing Apocalypse machines. This understandably makes Aloy a bit upset, and their already unstable relationship is put through yet another obstacle. Aloy's job here is to get to the center of the base, where the Eclipse are keeping a modified Tallneck corpse. She needs to get on top of it and destroy the device on top of its head. That should, according to Silence, crash the network. Thankfully, the Eclipse are doing some blasting nearby, so it's not necessary you do the whole mission in stealth mode. Before getting to the Tallneck, there is a base of operations that Aloy needs to infiltrate and clear of all the patrolling cultists. There you can see fucking Helis's personal quarters, and Aloy can scan a couple of things to get some backstory on him. I'm not actually going to go into any of them because none of it is very interesting. Helis is about as bland of a villain as you're ever gonna get. I only bring it up to remind you that this man exists. You might have forgotten while the game was telling a story worth paying attention to. Moving on, Aloy gets closer and closer to the blasting while she searches for the Tallneck. When she gets there, she sees Hades itself for the very first time, live and in machine. Hades is inside of a Horus, and the cultists have been blasting around it trying to get the corpse freed from the cliffside. After gawking for a bit, Aloy destroys the module, but not before alerting Hades and every single one of his followers in the area. This is what leads to a scripted sequence where you have to escape the base as quickly as possible while the cultists are shooting fire arrows at you, yada yada bing bang boom. Aloy is, again, understandably upset that Silence chose to selectively omit some details of the mission before she went in. Details like the fact that Hades itself was there and easily could have killed her if it really wanted to. Then Silence goes on about how trust is for fools and they should focus on mutual self-interest and finding the answers to Zero Dawn. And now that the focus network is down, there's nothing stopping them from getting into Sunfall and following the trail of the clues from the past. This mission gives me flashbacks to when Rost first took Aloy outside of the Embrace. I mean, sure, this mission had a specific goal that was important and needed to be accomplished, but both missions feel like filler content, both ending with an older man lecturing Aloy about some shit that she ultimately doesn't seem that interested in. Is this the patriarchy, or is it just bad writing? It's probably both. Now it's time for Sunfall, the last big settlement to discover in this game, and the only city that feels at all comparable in size and scope with Meridian. The Shadow Karja definitely come off as a more militaristic version of the regular Karja, and their sacrificial altar, the Sun Ring, takes center stage as the most prominent feature in the city. At this point in the story, I was thirsting for some answers. I really wanted to know what became of Project Zero Dawn and how Elizabeth Sobek saved life on Earth from extinction. So imagine my shock when I finally got to Sunfall and the game throws a ridiculously loaded side quest right in my face. We're all gearing up for this monumental story moment, and now, for some inexplicable reason, the writers saw fit to introduce an entire side quest line, which happens to be probably the most theoretically important one in the game. The side quest line here starts with Aloy trying to stop a group of bounty hunters tasked with killing someone, and it ends up with sneaking the child Sun King of the Shadow Karja out of Sunfall and into regular Karja territory. Something this fucking crazy you'd think would deserve to be main content material, but nope, side quests only. Again, this doesn't help the War Party and Dervahl questlines feel like main content. In fact, I'd argue it does the exact opposite. How come those two stories are given the main quest treatment when this quest about saving a child king from certain abuse is relegated to side content? If anything, this side quest should theoretically have more of an impact on the societies and characters involved than either of those other quest lines. Anyway, one good thing about it being a side quest is that I don't feel obligated to dive into it and explain how I feel about it, so we can just move on. Before entering the ruins under the Sun Ring and finally discovering the truth about Project Zero Dawn, Silence makes an ominous remark about how beyond this vent is a point of no return, and that Aloy should square away all of her business above ground before going in. This, on the surface, doesn't make a whole lot of sense given that, spoiler alert, this is not the last mission of the game. I think this is the game's way of letting the player know it's okay to do that side quest line we just talked about, but it's pretty ham-fisted and doesn't exactly feel natural, especially not from the character of Silence. Regardless, into the ruins we go, where we come across yet another mechanical door. This door works fine, but it's blocked by something, so it has to do an emergency vent, which then alerts the Shadow Karja above ground that something is going on. This suspense is arbitrary though, since you'll be given plenty of time to explore each room of the ruins as you make your way through them, which is great because this might just be the single best ruins sequence in the entire game. After making our way through a few entrance rooms, we get to a holographic theater with a message from General Harris. He explains that Operation Enduring Victory was built on a lie that Project Zero Dawn was a weapons program aimed at eliminating the robot hordes. Instead, the project is aimed at preserving life to come after the inevitable extinction inflicted by the robot plague. When the message plays out, you can move into the next room and immediately get attacked by Shadow Karja soldiers that crawl through the vents to get in. After the soldiers are dealt with, you can, and should, search through this entire room and scan all of the different text data points and audio logs from several of the people who were brought in to work on the project. All of their reactions to the news they just received from General Harris are completely different, and the voice actors perfectly sell all of their emotions. This stuff really is brilliant. In the next room is another holographic message, this time from Elizabeth Sobek, and it spells out the overarching plan for Project Zero Dawn. Zero Dawn at its core is a terraforming initiative intended to bring life back to planet Earth after the Pharaoh robots destroy it all. Running the project after all living humans die will be an AI named Gaia. Gaia will, over several centuries of time, eventually be able to decrypt the codes that govern the Pharaoh swarms, and in the meantime, she'll be preparing to give rebirth to life on Earth. Underneath Gaia are several subordinate functions, each with its own set of priorities. We won't talk about all of them, but it's important to note that Hades is among these subfunctions. There's also a subfunction named Apollo that was supposed to teach the freshly created humans about the history and culture of human civilization before the apocalypse. That obviously didn't happen since nobody in Aloy's world knows or really even cares about the old ones. I might be giving away my inexperience with the science fiction genre here, but I find all of this very compelling. It kind of feels like this game takes parts of Terminator, The Matrix, and Fallout and repurposes them into a new narrative. But again, I have not seen or played any of those pieces of media, so I really can't judge. All I can say is that at this point I was, and continue to be, extremely hooked on this concept. The dozens of audio logs documenting the reactions of the project's workers just sell it to me even more. In the next room, after the explanation of Project Zero Dawn, you get attacked yet again by some Shadow Carja soldiers, who at this point have basically replaced the Eclipse cultists, almost as if the two groups are completely interchangeable. Actually, they are completely interchangeable, because in the next room after that, you get attacked by the Eclipse cultists. I guess these guys must have just switched out of their army uniform before heading down into the ruins. After dealing with them, Aloy heads to the next section of the ruins, which is, in my opinion, one of the most memorable sections of this game. She goes through each subsection and encounters a hologram of the alpha of that subsection talking about its focus. Very quickly, I want to mention that the Hephaestus section is the one that's responsible for the cauldrons, and after the hologram is up, Aloy remarks that the machines that the cauldrons make shouldn't be so aggressive. And in fact, they haven't been until about 10 years ago. This is the same problem that Rost was talking about when they first went out to get a Sawtooth. This is one of those things that we don't really get full closure on in this game, and I have a sneaking suspicion that a good portion of the sequel will be dedicated to solving this exact problem. Also, the Apollo program isn't saving any data files in French, which has just got to be the biggest kick in the balls to all of those highfalutin French bastards that think their language is so culturally important. Je ne vois aucun problème avec cette omission. Among these subsections, we of course come across the area for Hades. Hades' original function was to reverse Gaia's terraforming efforts in the event that they didn't go exactly according to plan, which was more than likely on the first try. An understandable safeguard in the face of an uncertain future, but we aren't told how it got outside of Gaia and why it specifically wants to kill Aloy. Our next step is the personal office of Elizabeth Sobek herself, and one of the first things that we're treated to once we're inside is a hologram of a conversation between Dr. Sobek and Gaia. Gaia is telling Elizabeth that she recently studied the Quaternary Extinction event, which is, if you're unfamiliar, the extinction of almost all megafaunal species across the globe. Gaia feels upset about this extinction, which is why, perhaps, most of the robots she created resemble those megafaunal species that went extinct. This is when explanations in world building pay off. They didn't have to explain why all the robots are shaped like bigger versions of animals we already know, but they did it anyway, and the story is that much more rich because of it. At the heart of Elizabeth's office is the Alpha Registry, which is the key to get past the door inside the Sacred Mountain in Nora territory. Aloy begins copying it, and right as it's finished downloading, she gets attacked by guess who? It's fucking Beefcake Man. He captures her and brings her to be sacrificed in the Sun Ring. What follows is one of, if not the worst set of dialogue lines in the entire game, which stings all the more because of how good the game was doing up until this point. Helis goes on some insane ramblings because he's #unhinged, and he's an instrument of prophecy. Literally all of the worst villain stereotypes you can think of. During this rant, he tells Aloy that he's sent word to his cultists to rally the forces in the Nora land and wipe out the Nora tribe. I'm wondering how he could possibly do this after all of his cultists were summarily wiped out by his certain Nora war party, but whatever. Upon hearing this, Aloy has the option to respond with the phrase, "They're irrelevant." Which seems extremely harsh and makes it seem like Aloy doesn't care about the Nora at all. Please remember this for when it comes up in just a second. The actual dialogue line itself is a lot less harsh than that phrase gives off, but again I shall remind you that these options only convey the illusion of choice, and all roads lead to Helis destroying your focus and dropping you into the Sun Ring to fight a behemoth unarmed. You can lead the behemoth to run into the support pillars that are holding up the platform that your equipment is on, knocking them down so that you can actually start to fight back. The only good part about this entire scene is that you might reflexively try to scan the behemoth with your focus, only to realize that you don't have a focus anymore. It's one of those great video gamey feelings when a seemingly integral gameplay mechanic is taken right out from under you at a pivotal moment in the story. After killing the behemoth, Helis sends some corruptors after you, but someone has other plans, and that someone is Silence. Here in person, Silence busts through the walls of the Sun Ring and rides off with Aloy while Helis screams from the rafters, "Traitor!" Outside the Sun Ring and a safe distance from the nearest Shadow Carja soldier, Aloy and Silence can finally talk face to face. You can exhaust the dialogue wheel asking Silence a bunch of things, but the most pressing matter is that Aloy needs to get back to the Sacred Mountain and stop the Eclipse from murdering her people along the way. It's been a very, very long road, but we're finally coming down to the last few stretches. I really wish the ability to fast travel was taken away here. Fast traveling into the Nora land and immediately seeing the carnage around you just doesn't hit as hard as racing across the map, knowing that every moment you're not there, more Nora are dying. Aloy's wooded homeland is up in smoke by the time she gets back there. The Eclipse have sent corruptors and corrupted machines into the Embrace, and the Braves are crumbling under the weight of the assault. We fight our way through the familiar territory, through the Embrace, then into Mother's Heart, and eventually right up to the entrance of the Sacred Mountain, where a corrupted Thunderjaw is waiting. Then we take it out, and it seems like that's the last of them for now. Once the assault is over, Aloy has a reunion with Varl. I didn't talk about him all that much when he first came up, but I'm fond of Varl's character. He plays the devoted soldier pretty well, but he's not so rigid in his beliefs to completely shun every new revelation that Aloy throws at him. All those that survive the attack are taking shelter inside the mountain. You can spend time catching up with all the old faces from Chapter 1, talk with War Chief Sona, ignore Teb, pick a fight with some guy we hardly talked about, or you could just go talk to the Matriarchs that are in front of the door. Aloy needs to get in there so she can give the door the next Windows update and finally get to see where she was born. The facility inside Allmother Mountain is a cradle facility where human embryos were gestated and nurtured into maturity after the world was properly terraformed out of extinction. Inside are a bunch of creepy looking wall paintings and a couple of holograms of the first human beings interacting with their robotic caretakers. A couple of the holograms explain that there was a problem with the facility. Certain areas were locked away from the inhabitants, and they weren't allowed to leave the children's area. When Aloy gets into the blocked off sections, she finds the remnants of the Apollo program. What follows is a message from Gaia herself, detailing the problems that have recently occurred. There's no explanation of what happened to Apollo, but we do find out how Hades became a problem. According to Gaia, an unknown transmission was made to the Gaia Prime facility that made all of these subordinate functions, not just Hades, self-aware intelligences. This is where Hades was born. His first sentient act was to take over the terraforming system and destroy life on Earth. Gaia obviously wanted to stop this, so she decided to blow herself and the Gaia Prime facility up. Once she's gone, there will be nothing left to regulate the terraforming system, and even though it could survive on its own for a little while, eventually the system will spin out of control. This is the cause for the derangement and the machines getting more aggressive over the past 10 years. As a solution to this problem, Gaia decided to create Aloy as a clone of Elizabeth Sobek, in the hopes that the tribe living outside the facility, the Nora, would nurture her into maturity. Then her genome would allow her to enter Project Zero Dawn facilities and eventually reboot Gaia. Before Gaia can go through with this plan, Hades severs the connections Gaia had with all of her subordinate functions and then corrupts the Alpha registry at the Cradle facility so that the cloned Elizabeth won't be able to get in and figure out what to do. Obviously, this failed, and now Aloy has to go to the Gaia Prime facility to get the Master Override, which is this big MacGuffin that has the power to take Hades out. This is the conclusion of the very first mystery this game put out there. Literally the first thing you learn about Aloy is that she doesn't have a mother, and now she knows that she was born not just by an artificial intelligence, but for the purpose of restoring balance and order to the world. Like, this is some real Avatar shit right here, and I haven't said much about Aloy's voice actor, but I think her reaction to receiving this monumental revelation...
I never had a mother. I'm not a person. I'm an instrument. Manufactured by a machine.
Is pretty underwhelming. It's severely undersold, and honestly, it's not even written that well. Since Aloy's been basically a blank slate protagonist for the duration of this game, a natural reaction that she should have to this situation could vary depending on which dialogue choices you've been picking over the course of the game, but guess what? It doesn't. This is an even bigger problem when she goes to confront the matriarchs and the survivors of the Nora tribe after leaving the Cradle facility. According to your dialogue choices, Aloy could have been acting relatively sympathetic to the Nora during the game, or she could have been acting outright hostile towards them. But in the end, she has to exist in this strange middle ground between these two attitudes. On the one hand, she lies to them and tells them what happened inside the Cradle facility in a way that's pretty infantilizing, but it's more comprehensible than the truth and gels a lot more with their belief system. On the other hand, she yells at them for practicing their religion at her and scolds them for being xenophobic, I guess? I think a lack of clear character progression is the reason why this whole monologue makes very little sense. Either way, it's just further evidence that the stuff happening underground works a lot more than the stuff that happens with the tribal societies above ground. Next stop is Gaia Prime, the last ruins we need to explore before the big finale. As we're nearing the end of this video, I'd like to remind you that this game looks really fucking good, as demonstrated by the gorgeous lighting in this shot of the Broken Mountain. This is the corpse of the Gaia Prime facility. Silence has constructed a workshop in front of the door to get in, but Aloy will be the one to finally open it and get inside. Since the entire complex was destroyed in an explosion, these ruins are the most ruined that we've seen yet. Even so, there are still plenty of rooms and intact audio logs to discover. This time, you won't be listening to the dying words of any soldiers or the incredulous reactions of those first learning about Zero Dawn. These audio logs are from the alpha members of Project Zero Dawn, each responsible for directing and preparing a specific subfunction of Gaia. This facility is where they spent the rest of their days. Aloy makes her way through the compound, as she always does, and eventually she comes to a meeting room where, you guessed it, we get another hologram of a scene from the past. I suppose some people might be turned off by the abundance of these same types of scenes cropping up over and over again, especially in the back half of the game, but personally I find their contents far more engaging than the shit that happens elsewhere in the world, and as such I don't particularly mind their reuse. This hologram is the death scene of Elizabeth Sobek. One of the doors of the Gaia Prime facility wasn't closing properly, and the only way to fix the problem before the swarms could find them was to seal it up from the outside. Elizabeth called everyone to the meeting room to discuss this issue, but instead of going there, she just went out and did the deed herself, sacrificing her life in the process. For a character we don't get to see or interact with, Elizabeth had a sort of grit about her that made her character feel grounded in some sort of reality. And her death scene, while not being the most emotional thing in the world, did function well. There are a couple of audio logs you can find after this of the other alphas eulogizing her, and some of them are pretty damn touching. One of them is not very touching though, the one from Ted Farrow, the corporate asshat that's been responsible for this entire fucking disaster. Why the fuck is this asshole still here, and in Gaia Prime of all places? Gaia Prime was supposed to be the facility for the alphas of Project Zero Dawn to support the functions of Gaia directly. All remaining staff members were supposed to be housed in a place called Elysium, an underground settlement designed to sustain the lives of 2,000 original inhabitants. Why the hell is this absolute fuckhead Ted Faro in Gaia Prime at all? Well, he's here so that he can leave ominous-sounding audio logs for Aloy to discover as she makes her way to the control room. These audio logs are basically Ted Faro going full Joker mode, talking about how they're going to be filling future people's heads with a whole lot of nonsense, and wanting to make it all go away with a single stroke.
I really don't like the direction this is going.
Yeah, me either, Aloy. I have a feeling the writers are about to do something really fucking stupid. Inside the control room is the last holographic message that we'll see in this game. All of the alphas are gathered around the table, and who calls in but Ted Faro? He comes off as unstable and slips further into his Joker persona. Then he tells the alphas that he purged the Apollo program from the systems, deleted all the files so that humanity could start anew with a clean slate. I really despise this a lot, not because I think Ted is an evil man who did an evil thing, that much is patently obvious. That's exactly what I'm mad about. There has not been a single antagonist in this game that has not been a completely unhinged, bloodthirsty, psychopathic, repugnant creature. This isn't even just about having a nuanced villain. They tried to add layers to Dervahl's story by placing him in a love triangle with the Sun King and Ursa, but in that situation, adding layers to that type of tertiary antagonist only weakened his story arc. One of the many things that suck about these last few moments with Ted Faro is that the tragic loss of knowledge is not something that we have to suspend our disbelief too much to sympathize with. I mean, we've had the burning of the Library of Alexandria, we've had, over the years, a myriad of different ancient writers and thinkers lost to the sands of time. Except in real life, the loss of that knowledge has always been a result of a bunch of different socioeconomic and political factors, none of which were one individual person deciding to destroy it all because he was an unhinged psychopath, and somehow he had the means to not only destroy all of that knowledge, but also murder everyone who could fix that problem. History rarely ever works like that. Look, I'm all for simple antagonists and the struggle between good versus evil. Lord of the Rings is one of my favorite narratives of all time, and Sauron is about as evil gets. That being said, there's a limit to how much you can squeeze out of a one-dimensional villain. This game has 4 one-dimensional villains, and they all suck ass. I'm gonna stop ranting about this now, because I feel like I've made my point, and I just want to get to the end of this fucking game already. When Aloy gets back out to Silence's workshop, the Mans himself is waiting for her there, and he reveals that he was the one who originally found Hades. He helped it build the Shadow Carja armies in order to take back Meridian. He did this in exchange for knowledge. In one line, he says that Hades taught him about physics and calculus, which I think is really funny. Like, I could just imagine Silence sitting down at one of those desks with a foldable table, writing down notes like he's a college freshman. What a fucking nerd. What the hell is he taking calculus for? Anyway, Hades was always concerned about the Spire, which is a gigantic metal tower that you may have never seen before depending on where you've gone and how much you've looked up at the horizon. The Spire is a transmitter. One of Gaia's subfunctions, Minerva, was tasked with coming up with the deactivation codes for the Pharaoh robots, and distributing the codes throughout the world via these transmission towers. Silence and Aloy both suspect that Hades wants to get access to this tower so that he can send out his own signal to wake up all the Pharaoh robots and destroy life on Earth all over again. Now we have our final objective. Get back to Meridian, warn Sun King Avad of the impending attack on both Meridian and the Spire, defend both locations, and kill Hades by impaling him with the Master Override. Did I mention that Aloy got the Master Override from the control room? Well, she did. Sun King Avad believes Aloy. Obviously. I assume that's why the Dervahl questline had to be main quest material, so that Aloy doesn't just show up at the king's door right at the end of the game and say, "You gotta help me."
You gotta help me!
The secretary man talks to Aloy about the defenses, then tells her that he's made the home of Olin Delverson available to her, regardless of whether or not you chose to kill Olin earlier. This makes it seem like the game was expecting you to kill Olin, and it didn't want to account for any other outcome, so even if you don't, he's just around somewhere, not staying in his very nice home with his newly freed wife and child. While Meridian is waiting for the assault, you have the option of touring all the various defensive positions that the Karja have set up. Among them are a bunch of friends that you've met along the way. A fair amount of characters from several side quest lines show up to help Aloy in the fight, and some Nora Braves, including Varl, have left the Embrace to bolster the ranks. Once everyone's done talking, Aloy sleeps in Olin's house and the final battle is ready to begin. The attack starts by a huge explosion knocking down the side of a cliff so that the Pharaoh robots can use it as a ramp to get down to the city faster. Deathbringers and Corruptors are advancing on the base of the mesa, but somehow Helis and his Eclipse fucks sneak into the city and blow a hole right underneath the Sun King's palace. Then Aloy and Helis have their long-awaited showdown, and Aloy kills him.
And soon, no one will even remember you.
Well, she's right about one thing. After Helis is dealt with, Aloy goes to help the city guard at the bottom of the mesa. This next section of gameplay is some wave defense with Osram cannons. I'm glancing over some parts of this set piece, but I think it's grand and dangerous enough that it feels like a suitable climax to the story that we've been experiencing thus far. The gameplay, as always, is a bit shallow, but I mean, so is the gameplay in the rest of the game. Also, this area at the bottom of the mesa is one of the few areas in the game where, on certain difficulty levels, you could fully refill your medicine pouch with the herbs that grow by the river. That, and the fact that it's close by Meridian, makes it highly likely that you've spent a lot of time running back and forth in this area. Now, to see it go up in smoke as a horde of corrupted machines overrun it is another one of those video gamey moments that's hard to truly quantify or put into words. It's like seeing your commute to work get blown into smithereens. Speaking of which, no matter how well you do at the tower defense, eventually the machines will break through and start torching the village behind you. Depending on how many side quests you've done, you might, again, be very familiar with this place, and seeing it go up in flames is definitely one of those oh shit moments. Aloy starts to make her way up to the spire, but before she can get there, Hades starts transmitting his apocalypse signal. He wakes up all the nearby Pharaoh robots, but they're not functional yet until they've consumed enough biomass. This gives Aloy a bit of time to get to Hades and stab him with the Master Override before the machines are fully operational and start killing everything in sight again. The actual final boss is just a beefed up Deathbringer that summons corrupted machines to help fight you. It goes down just like any other Deathbringer, and then Aloy finally has a chance to confront Hades and stab him with the Master Override. And that's it. She purged Hades to prevent it from causing another apocalypse, and everyone lives happily ever after. The end. There's an epilogue sequence where we discover that after sealing the hatch on the Gaia Prime facility, Elizabeth walked all the way to her family home and then died. As Aloy is walking over her flower-covered corpse, an audio log is playing of Elizabeth telling a story about her childhood to Gaia. I won't recount the whole story, but the moral is that because humans are intelligent, self-aware creatures, we are obligated to serve life and help nurture it whenever we can. This hits as the game's central theme. Military-industrial complex bad, regarding life as only a means to further human greatness bad, general disregard for life and all things that grow bad. As the value at the core of this story, I think it's a nice sentiment, but ultimately it rings pretty hollow. I mean, when it comes down to it, all of the problems of this story were set in motion as a result of psychotic maniacs, and the only resolution to these problems was to kill them, if you could. To be honest, I don't see that as a very life-positive story. In fact, it seems to promote exactly the opposite idea, that there are some beings that you should kill. If the true message was that there are some things in life that are worth fighting for, then I guess this could make sense. But if your moral is going to be all life deserves protecting, then do you see how that could be a problem when at the end of the day, killing people is what resolves the conflict? I appreciate the game trying to get its message across here in the last couple of minutes, but I don't think that it really delivered it all that effectively throughout the rest of the game. So, what have we learned? I think one of the biggest takeaways is that Horizon Zero Dawn is a safe game. Extremely safe. It's impressive if you look at it as Guerrilla Games' first open world game, but that's really the only way that it's impressive. If you saw this game in a lineup with a bunch of other open world games, I'm not sure you'd be able to pick up on the developer's inexperience. I'm not sure if that's because Zero Dawn is just that good, or if it's because of how mediocre most open world games have become over the years. There was ample room in the narrative for a real critique of capitalism, just by virtue of the fact that the world went extinct because of a corporation and the privatization of the military. But nope, that's just a bit too complex of an idea to put out there, so they have to place all of the blame solely on the individual villain, the super mega Hitler CEO. There's a mild critique of religion somewhere in this game, but it's hardly allowed to speak because Aloy's character is being stretched too thin, trying to cover all of these different dialogue options. Hopefully I didn't put my foot in my mouth too much about the whole feminism thing. Again, I'm really not a scholar on the issue, but I think at the end of the day my take is that, again, this is a safe product. There are mentions here and there of gender dynamics and gendered expectations, but there really isn't any exploration of the topic, and of course there's no mention of any sort of non-binary identity, which is a bit upsetting, and I do hope they fix that in the sequel. While Horizon Zero Dawn does lack a good narrative structure, a compelling protagonist, and complex villains, it does have a few things going for it. The atmosphere and world building are both excellent. I completely buy into this world and the premise under which all of these characters have found themselves. If you remember back to the very first minutes of the gameplay video, I said that I don't think this game is setting itself up for a good sequel, and this right here is why. A lot of what I found enjoyable about this game was discovering this world and how it works. But now that all of that has been established, I don't really see that much more value in a new set of stories along the lines of the ones that we find above ground in this game. The stuff that happened below ground was great, but if we keep digging, are we really going to find that much more gold, or is the vein already starting to run dry? Now that we've discovered how life on this world died and came back, what else is there? At the end of the day, I still think this game is worth playing if you haven't yet. I don't personally think it's one of the best games of the PlayStation catalog or anything, but at the very least, the overall experience for me was more positive than negative. But there was a lot of both. Hopefully this video will promote some discussion on this game and both its achievements and its shortcomings. I'm gonna go sleep for a week now. I hope you guys are doing well, staying active, drinking water, and I'll see you in the next video.